from a traditional method of financing to a more revolutionized method of manipulating numbers. Talking Point connects with Mr. Ifthikar Mohamed, who happens to be the co-founder of WIS Group. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
How do you see modern financing methods such as crowdfunding and peer-to-peer lending impacting traditional banking and investment channels?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is a fairly new concept. It's trying to cater to areas which the banks don't cater. So we see that quite a lot now. It's gaining a lot of popularity. I'll just take a few examples to explain this. So for example, deposits. Now, people who had savings in the West, they started saving money in their accounts. And because the interest rates have been very low, the depositors didn't get much returns. So what these depositors did was they were looking at alternative solutions which will pay them some return. So that's why these concepts have sort of come up. That's from a depositor's point of view. But if you take from a borrower's point of view, things have sort of like, say for example, Islamic banking, if you take for example. Islamic banking has picked up mainly because of these methods, because there are banks who don't cater to Islamic banking and people look for solutions. So that has kind of opened up. So that has actually prompted even banks to now consider these solutions where, people have now found.
In what ways has technology such as blockchain and AI revolutionized the financial management and decision-making processes within businesses?
Okay, so there's two questions there. One is blockchain. Blockchain initially picked up because of the cryptocurrency, but I think banks have capitalized on that. For example, there's a bank called Mola Finance. Now, traditionally, if you go to a bank to get an application like a home loan or a mortgage, you call it, approved, it normally takes a few weeks. But companies like Mola Finance, using this technology, they can now even approve some of the mortgages in a day. So there's a massive change that a technology like blockchain has sort of created. And the second question is the AI or artificial intelligence. Now I work very closely with a company which sort of I'm a director of. We use artificial intelligence to find financial solutions to people. AI still is quite primitive in the finance sector. It's not because there's no investment, but it's because of regulation. Now, we managed to keep it under regulations and bring us certain products out. So if somebody wants like a housing finance, I'll take that as an example, our software can find them the right lender. So for example, if somebody wants to go to borrow £100,000, Barclays might not offer it, HSBC might offer it, Halifax might not offer it. So we, using artificial intelligence, we can sort of pinpoint which lender will offer them the money. So they don't have to walk into each lender. So that's something that we are doing. But also we are using artificial intelligence to answer questions. So we have a chat bot in our application that we use. Now that bot is actually talking like a human. So you can ask point-to-point questions like, what's the weather today? It will give you an answer. But it also can have a conversation, like a dialogue flow with people as well. So it is changing that space. So, watch out, like it's all coming, but it's still quite primitive because of regulations, but this space will change.
With the rise of fintech companies offering alternative financial services, how can traditional financial institutions adapt and stay competitive in today's market?
I think this is touching on the earlier question as well. Banks, obviously, they've got the backing of finance. So, a lot of these fintech companies which come up with new ideas, they copy, because otherwise if they don't add up, they'll kind of lose out, right? So either they copy or they buy over. Now, for example, a leading bank, Barclays in the UK, they bought this company called Kensington. But they bought this company, which is also a bank, because Kensington had good technology. So banks do that as well, because sometimes adapting and doing it yourself takes years. But when somebody else has done it, it's easier for them to do that. So yeah, so they wait for opportunities like that to capitalize.
What role does data analytics play in modern financing, and how can businesses leverage data-driven insights to optimize their financial strategies?
Okay, so data analytics and data science is a massive part nowadays. Say, for example, it's very important to look at this area because a lot of banks make decisions based on that. So traditionally, if you take UK and the West, right, most of their decisions were based on a credit scoring system. So they go to credit reference agencies like Experian, Equifax, and there's few others. And they look at how people perform in terms of their credit. But banks have now gone a step further. They look at data analytics using things like open banking. That's again a fairly new concept where you can electronically bring all bank accounts together of a person and you can make judgments. So for example, if somebody is earning say £10,000 for a month, for argument's sake, and they have expenses of 5,000, there's headroom of 5,000. So if somebody is applying for, let's say, a mortgage for £4,000 a month to pay, so that means they are left with a headroom of only £1,000. Now the banks using analytics, they'll say, okay, so what if this happens and what if that happens? How if things change? So based on the risk profile of the bank, they will decide whether having headroom of £1,000 is enough to give him the mortgage. So otherwise they might give a lower amount. But some banks, based on the risk profile, because using analytics, they'll say, okay, we are happy to take this risk. They might give you, or they might give you even more money, right? So all that's driven by data nowadays. So that space is changing a lot, yeah.
With the increasing focus on sustainability and ESG criteria, how do you incorporate these factors into financial planning and investment decisions?
Yeah, that's a good question because green concept's pretty big. UK and of course all the countries in the world, they're sort of trying to get to net zero at a certain point. So obviously financial institutions have to play a big part as well. So they reward people who are green. For example, if somebody is taking some kind of a finance facility to upgrade their carbon emissions, there are special deals that banks would give you. So even if you buy a house, if somebody is in an A grade or a B grade in terms of energy performance in the house, they reward you with better rates. So banks are promoting this concept as well. So therefore, it's always good to sort of be a bit more green because there are a lot of benefits. Of course, I'm only talking about banks here, but there are other options as well. So if you are going towards this big concept of being green, there are government grants and various other facilities as well that comes interest-free or free of charge at least. So there are a lot of schemes like that out there as well, which helps the business. So going green is not a bad idea.
How has the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated the adoption of digital payment solutions and reshaped the landscape of modern financing?
I think COVID, in many ways, it's a good thing because it's sort of pushed technological boundaries. Let's take an easy example because if you have a card, nowadays it's contactless, right? So if you went back 5 years, I remember in Sri Lanka, I used to have to sign before making a payment. But then that moved to chip and pin. But then with COVID, it's like tap and go now, right? So it has changed. That's one of the easier examples. But again, using open banking, there's a very popular company worldwide called WIS. Now WIS, what they did was, they did something very clever. They use open banking to help fund transfers. So before, if I had to transfer some money overseas, let's say I'm transferring money from UK to Sri Lanka, I probably had to wait 3 or 4 days until the money arrives, number one. Number two, it'll cost me 20, 30 pounds, right? But that's changed now with people like WIS, because they use the technology, and because the technology is so good and the banks connect so easily, they can now send money to Sri Lanka within a matter of minutes. And also it costs me a fraction of the price, and the exchange rates are much, much brilliant. So, people look at those alternatives. So that space has changed a lot. These are some of the simple examples, but again, a lot of the fintech companies were pushed to come with solutions. Even the banks were pushed, because if you're trying to open a bank account, you really can't go to the bank anymore because of COVID, right, at that time. So fintech companies came up with smart ways of opening bank accounts. You can stay at home, take a selfie, take a copy of your passport, and they do certain searches and they allow you to open an account. So that space has changed dramatically over the last few years.
As business navigate economic uncertainties and market volatiles, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs and startups seeking funding in the current financial climate?
Yeah, I think with the current market, funding has been a little tight. Because the interest rates are high, all-time sort of high levels now. So because it's so high, and the risks, banks are a little adverse. They're a little worried about taking adverse sort of risk on. So they're a little careful with giving. But if you have a solid business plan and a sizable sort of deposit to put down, the banks will welcome you, because we do commercial finance. With commercial finance, they never close the doors. I mean, I always tell people, if you close the doors in one area, it will open up somewhere else. Or, in the business world, we call it threats create opportunities. So likewise, all these unconventional methods like peer-to-peer financing, which you mentioned earlier, so those have kind of come forward as well. So there are a lot of steps that alternative finance people have sort of used to make this space a little easier. So those are never closed. Like I said, even the government, they want people to invest and they want people to start doing business again. So there are a lot of grants out there for the right ideas. So if there is ideas out there, it's not a bad idea to approach the government and say, look, this is my idea. If it is something revolutionary, the government always likes to back you, especially when it comes to tech. And there are some big subjects like the subjects you touched earlier on the green agenda or high-end fintech ventures. The government is always ready to back you. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for sure.
From complicated processes to a simplified method such as tap and go have been highly popular, and the entire process has been digitalized for our very own convenience. We were in conversation with Mr. Ifthikar Mohamed, who happens to be the co-founder of WIS Group. Thank you so much for connecting.
Thank you very much for having me.